Welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Mandy.
And I am Zach, and up next, the recovery series concludes with a look at laser, dry needling, ultrasound, and more. And after that, World of Running updates about New York City half, Barkley marathons, and more. Welcome back. We're glad you're with us so that you can hear our voice in your ear again. Because that's what we're doing.
No, it's not why they listen.
I didn't say why. I said that's what we're doing.
Yes, but we're going to bring you some great content this week that is going to be continuing on our recovery series.
We're also going to bring you great answers to your wonderful questions at the end of the month every month. And if you have not submitted a question this month, you need to, even if you've submitted one on other months. And so share questions about your training, about your upcoming experiences, your past or present circumstances, and we'll answer them on air end of the month. All you need to do to ask a question is go to AtoZrunning.com/question. Mm-hmm. Submit the form, and we'll share responses on air.
We also love to share stories, and I recently was running in Nashville, and I almost ran into some deer. They were unafraid, and I was able to
literally
run.
Almost just ran into them?
If I wouldn't have put on my brakes, I could have just plowed them over. There's a bunch of them.
Slap them on the hindquarters, and they'll get out of there.
No, well, they did end up moving, but
you.
it was pretty close, and there was many of them, and it happened a couple times.
Okay.
I had posted about this in stories on Instagram, and Jim reached out in a reply and told me an even better story, which was an actual collision between deer and man.
And that was it? Just a collision?
Well, so I guess what happened is that the deer jumped
on the
over a fence and actually ran into Jim while he was running and knocked him down.
What kind of craziness is going on in an animal's head when it's like, there's another animal, and the one and only place I don't want to be is in direct contact with it? And yet somehow.
Yeah, somehow it happened.
Yeah. All right. Well,
unlikely,
but
cool. I like that story.
I have two deer stories.
Okay.
Two crazy ones that have happened. The first one was, I don't know, years ago. I was running on a bike path, and it was one of those areas where you're like between a fence and a river. Like there's just nothing else. There's a little bit of shrub foliage, but it's basically a fence and a river and the bike path in between. And I'm running along early in the morning, and lo and behold, a buck is standing there, and it's looking right at me, and it starts stomping like, you better get out of my way.
No.
And I'm like, no, you better get out of my way. So I kept going. And he turns around and he hightails it. And I'm like, see, that's what I'm talking about. Well, about 5 seconds later, he turns back around and decides he'd rather come at me instead of run away.
No.
Comes straight at me. He's waving his head. He's doing all this crazy stuff. And at the last second, he veers off and jumps in the river. And that is how I won the standoff with a buck.
That actually makes me nervous because
it made me nervous too.
They do. It's rare, but they do fight.
I don't know what was going on there, except that I managed that one. And that was good. Okay, my second was more recently. This was just like a few weeks ago. And I'm running on the street, like in the middle of the neighborhood, right? We're not talking about some remote area. And I'm running up this steep hill. And any of you who know whereabouts we live, there's this road with this like quarter-mile long hill that's quite steep. I'm running up that hill. And as I'm doing that, there's a car right next to me. It's actually literally driving right next to me. And they get up to the top of the hill before me because they're in a car. And but only barely because they had passed me right near the top. So as they get to the top, their brakes go on and they stop. And I get to the top of the hill and I realize the reason they stopped is because there are 7 deer standing in the middle of the road and they're not moving. They're just standing there. And so I'm getting close and I'm thinking, wow, those deer are just not going to move. So I run at them. Like I'm thinking they'll move for me. Maybe not this giant steel trap car, but they'll move for me, right? So I run at them. Well, apparently these deer were loath to leave the road. They had some aversion to getting off the road. Huh. So when I ran at them, they started running too. But they didn't run off the road. They just ran along the road with me. So for about 15 seconds, I'm counting it, 15 seconds, I'm in the middle of a pack of 7 deer, and we're just running together.
That's cool.
I'm not kidding right now, and I'm not exaggerating. 15 seconds, I just ran with a pack of deer. Are they called packs? Herd?
I think it's a herd.
I didn't know that deer were called
Should I look
herds.
that
That's
up?
why I was going with pack, but they're seriously not dogs. So well, anyway, so I'm running with this group of deer in the middle of the road, and there's cars all around just stopped watching. And I kept thinking to myself, I wonder what they're thinking about what's happening, especially the ones who didn't see how it began. And then after about 15 seconds, finally one of the deer got brave and they left the road, stepped off into the woods on the side of someone's house, someone's property there. Not even really woods, like 3 trees.
So most of the people would call it a herd, but you could also call the group a bunch, a mob, a parcel, or a wrangle.
Okay, well, among those words, this one was definitely a mob.
A mob.
And they were
of
on the
deer.
prowl. All right, so there you go. Those are your deer stories for the day. You
So
didn't
fun.
think you were going to
Thanks,
get some
Jim.
of that. Thanks, Jim. That's just an exciting. And anyone else?
I'm
now,
glad you're okay with
Yes.
after that
Because
collision.
yours was more serious than the rest
I
of
did
ours.
follow up and asked if he was okay.
All right.
Yeah.
But did you get the deer? Or did you have a tag and was it in season? Are you allowed to take down
The
a
deer?
deer?
Shook it off too, but I guess
without a
the
weapon?
deer was stunned.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, why
Yeah.
not? All right, so now everyone else who's got crazy deer stories, throw them into the social medias and tag us because we are super interested in all of your wild deer stories about things that have happened while running. Okay.
But not your tame deer stories.
No, just the wild ones because that's what we're all about. All right, well, speaking of wild things, this Wednesday, so if you're listening before
Wild
March
Wednesday.
22, if you're listening before March 22, then you haven't missed it yet. And if you're listening after March 22, then you already were there because of course you were going to be there. On
Or you
March-
could listen after the fact.
Yes, that's true as well. On March 22, we are going live on Facebook with Rivertown Races. I think this is the last time we're doing this before Rivertown Races event. So we're going live with race director Andrew Buickamo. We're going to talk about training in the last month or so of a season. And if you know anything about what we say on the podcast about training, the last 6 weeks of your training season are the most interesting. That's when things are very, very different. And can be different depending on what you need to do and what you are training for. So that being the case, you definitely want to catch this one because we're going to be answering your questions live on air as well. So you go to Facebook, you find Rivertown Races, or I think if you find AtoZrunning, either one will be there. But look for the event, find the live event, and tune in at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time so that you can catch all the action. And insights.
And again, that's on Facebook, and it's relevant to anyone that is entering the final stages of race preparation. So you'll want to tune in for that, even if you're not able to make it to Rivertown. But if you are, we'll get to see you there in person. The race is April 22nd. There's a 5K, a 10K, and a half marathon. Zach's going to be running. I will be cheer squad. And if you register, you can get 10% off with the code ATOZ10. Again, that's A to Z10.
Register at rivertownraces.com. All right, well, these are exciting things. We've got a great topic for you and some fascinating World of Running updates after that. So sit tight and get ready, or run smooth, or whatever you're doing right now. Get ready for
The main topic.
Well, we have been talking about recovery for the last several episodes with a few things in between, like the Q&A episodes. But we've been talking about recovery largely because it sounds like most of us have a kind of limited exposure to the recovery methods available to us and a limited understanding of what things are the most valuable in what instances. So if you've missed any of these episodes, we're going to encourage you to go back and listen to any of them that say recovery series on them. We talked about icing and heating. We talked about rest and what that's doing for you, but we also talked about things like myofascial release and some of the more technical aspects of therapies you can, in fact, still do for yourself, on yourself. But now today, we're going to take the conversation to that level of these are things you're probably not going to be able to do to yourself on your own. You're probably going to need some medical professionals and equipment that you likely don't have and likely need to go to a place to use. And so that being the case, part of the reason why we wanted to wrap up the recovery series with this particular element is because these are the more intensive interventions. These tend to be the things that it's like when I've got a problem and I really need something to make a difference here, what are my options? What kind of stuff is available to me? We're not going to cover probably every single thing under the sun For example, we're not going to talk about some steroid shots or what those do for you. I don't consider that personally to be a recovery method. I think that falls under a totally different category. But we're going to try to address here in the closing reflection, what are the most likely options that you have available to you at a local physical therapist or other medical specialist who might have some of this equipment.
Mm-hmm. We're going to kick things off with laser.
Oh, this is good. This is a good one. It's lasers. I mean, like literally, like they're zapping you with lasers.
Yeah. So what is laser therapy? Like Zach said, it's using specific wavelengths of light to treat soft tissues.
It sounds way less cool when you just say, we're just waving light at you. We're shooting you with lasers.
Yeah, and there are physical therapy offices that have a version of this, but there's a more intensive one that Dr. John Maskell talked about on the show, and we have, I think, some more that we want to share from him on that, right?
We do, in fact. Yep.
Great. But what they have and what he's talking about is a more advanced laser treatment system. And it's actually been approved by the FDA, and this is like super recent. They require a lot in order to approve. So it is MLS M8 robotic laser therapy.
Robots shooting you with lasers.
Uh-huh. And it's cleared for relief of pain, inflammation, and edema.
Yeah, so now here's this is one you're not likely to find very easily in a local physical therapy office near you. So do a little bit of research. Where are there orthopedic lasers or where are there laser treatments?
An ortho laser just opened in Michigan. It's the first one in Michigan, and it's in Grand Rapids area. But I guess it's on every street corner pretty much in Europe. There's a lot of other countries that are utilizing this a lot more readily. And I think the holdup has been the FDA, perhaps.
Always
maybe.
is.
But there's so many recovery methods that aren't FDA approved. So I don't know. But it also, of course, is an investment for someone up front to bring laser to a state or to an area. So we're lucky to have just gotten it in Michigan, and that's ortho laser, and I'll link to it in our show blog post.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about what's going on here with laser specifically, because insofar as this is a really great idea for a treatment, there's two reasons. One, because there's like no downside, like negative side effect type of stuff.
Right.
Pretty much zero. I mean, I guess in theory there's like, for the next 8 hours, don't like ice things and stuff. And so like technically that's a side effect, I guess you could say. But it's super safe and it's highly effective. And so what happens with the laser treatment is you're talking like it takes about 5 to 7 minutes. So it's a very small amount of time. You go into their office and it might take 15 minutes total for your entire time in their office. And so 5 to 7 minutes, and they're zapping you with a laser and it's an acute location. So we're talking about an area where you've got some swelling, where you've got an injury that's in an acute stage and you're looking for recovery.
Tendinitis.
Yep. And especially, it's soft tissue injuries, especially tendon-related stuff, because that's so hard to heal as well. Muscles, tendons, and things are all effective here. And then what it's doing is this is the most fascinating part, is that the laser is itself addressing at a cellular level an effect. It's trying to essentially encourage your cells to enter a recovery phase more quickly.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yep.
If I'm dumbing down the description.
And, it helps with healing and improvement over time. So there's usually a recommended amount of sessions that you would do that would help you along your path to healing. And what does the research say? Well, about the robotic laser, I should say, this other method, we haven't seen a lot of research about that. But for low-level laser, there is already great research that reveals significant improvement in pain, range of motion, and motor function. And this is from the laser that's not as strong or effective. So that's exciting for those of us who do have access to the more powerful lasers. A systematic review of low laser yielded consistent, effective results and improvement of symptoms. And there's studies also that specifically find significant improvement for Achilles tendonitis injuries, which we've talked about recently. So, and a lot of runners experience that. So it's something that you might want to look into if you have Achilles issues.
So the first thing that I would say is if you have access to a laser therapy location, and do some searching to see if there's one near you. If you're in Michigan and you're near Grand Rapids, that's the one currently at the moment of the recording here. And so this is a situation where as soon as someone says, you've got tendonitis, you've got tendinopathy, or you've got a tendon strain or something, which is essentially what tendonitis is. So as soon as someone says that's what this looks like or that's what this might be, that's when you call the laser place that day and you get booked right away, because we're talking about substantial reduction in recovery time.
Yeah.
The sooner you start it, the better.
Yeah, and I'm just a study of one from my own experience, and I was able to get in right away because I already had scheduled the appointment when I had an adductor strain, and I was able to be back running in like 2 days, which that normally takes a week or more to come back from.
Hard to say that the laser was entirely to credit for that, because it usually takes 2 or 3 treatments before it's really making a substantial effect.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying I'm a study of one,
Yep.
and when I had mentioned that to John, he's like, the sooner you get in, the better.
Yep.
So it's possible because it was literally right after it happened.
It's like 2 days after the strain.
No, I mean
The day of the strain?
hours after I
Was it the
strained
day
it.
of? I didn't realize it was the same day. Even
It
better.
was the same day.
Yeah, well, if you've got a chance for that, if you live next door to a laser place and can just walk
I was
in there-
already scheduled.
Yeah. So this is kind of the point then. When we talk about we're looking for treatments that are highly effective, there's two elements of highly effective. One is that the downsides are minimal, if any, and so you can do it without any concerns or risks. And then the other side is how much of a benefit does it potentially have? Because most of these kinds of treatments, they don't necessarily have proof of a substantial benefit. Some is always good, but in this instance, it's a substantial benefit, or at least more substantial than others, and no downsides. No downsides that are concerning.
Next up is dry needling.
This
which
is
I've
a
had
lot
done
more common.
once. Have you've had it done, right?
I hope not.
No? Okay, I've had it done
Someone's
once.
stabbing me with. So they're shooting you with lasers. Now they're stabbing you with little swords.
Oh my goodness. Well, the thing with the laser, it is painless. Just want to make sure that that's clear, because Zach's being dramatic here. The laser is painless.
But the needles are not.
It's not bad. It's not bad. Mayo Clinic explains dry needling this way. During a dry needling treatment, one or more thin monofilament needles are inserted into a muscle trigger point.
One or more. It's like 10, 20.
A trigger point is a local band of tight, irritable, and dysfunctional muscle tissue. This often emerges because of injury, overuse, or poor movement patterns. So where I experienced dry needling was at my PT office.
Usually. Yep, that's pretty common.
I had poor movement patterns. I believe that's why.
Where did you get needled?
I think it was my hamstring.
Okay.
It was my hamstring.
So like 20 of them probably then.
I don't know
everywhere.
how many. I
Doink,
couldn't
doink.
see it.
You could feel it though. You're getting stabbed. All right. So enough of Zach's over dramatics about dry needling. I'll bring him back on the next one. But dry needling and what it's doing then is the key, because it is a release technique. It's helpful in releasing high tension points, which is why the trigger points are there. But it specifically is a nerve related therapy, or at least that's one of the more substantial contributions that it gives. So where you have the kind of the bundling of tissues, and especially where nerves are being inhibited in some sense in some of those clusters, dry needling can be especially effective in releasing some of that.
I like that. It also increases blood flow, and it's really known for reducing pain. And the research, there's not a ton of it. Mayo Clinic says that most patients report immediate relief from the treatment. That wasn't quantified. A systematic review and meta-analysis of dry needling concludes that evidence point to decreasing pain, but functionally it works best when paired with physical therapy. There wasn't a lot that they were able to measure in terms of improvement without
needling by itself.
Yeah, the needling by itself without being paired with physical therapy. And there's a meta-analysis, though, that suggests that it significantly helps with pain for both short term and long term. But that's one of those things that's difficult.
Because
like,
when
what
you
is the actual improvement?
stab someone, they can't feel the one pain anymore because they're just hurting from the stabbing. But
Zach,
that's true. Isn't that what
you're being okay?
Does your leg hurt? Here, let me squeeze your hand really hard. Now does your leg hurt? No, only my hand. So here's the thing with dry needling, though, is with the therapy thing, remember that the point of dry needling is a kind of release, right? So the same thing when we talked about myofascial releases, the same rule applies here, where if you release something, that's great. But if you don't do anything to then rehabilitate the area, your chances are that release is going to be temporary.
Yeah. And another good point that Zach had made earlier when I discussed this with him is that when you have decreased pain, as the studies are able to prove, I guess, so to speak, there's evidence of that, then you are able to do more of your PT, which then can help you towards your improvement in the process. So there is an advantage to having that pain reduction, not only for the daily life, but also for the rehabilitation. So that was what the systematic review said, that it should be paired with physical therapy when you are using this technique.
So dry needling then as an application tends to be recommended when you've got some serious tightness, mobility problems, especially insofar as there's like trigger point areas or like acute knots in the tissues.
All right. So next up is ultrasound.
All right. So we were zapping you with lasers. We're stabbing you with needles. Now this one's actually not quite as, it's like super ultrasonic waves of
therapeutic
music.
ultrasound machines use vibration and thermal effects to reduce skeletal muscle injury, lessen skeletal muscle soreness, and improve blood flow and promote muscle relaxation. Yep. And according to Harvard Health, it can be relieved. The pain that is in your joints or your muscles can be relieved through ultrasound, and it's a pretty straightforward process. It uses sound waves to promote blood flow, calm muscular spasms, and speed up healing. And a therapist will, if you don't know how it works and you haven't had a child inside you that they're ultrasounding, but they use a gel in the area that hurts, sometimes with medication. So that's another element of it. And it's then they're able to treat the soft tissue for inflammation, and it helps with treating wounds, repairing tissue, and facilitating muscular stretching.
So the main reason why all of that is happening is because the sound waves, aka the vibrations that are going through your tissues, help to just kind of like think about it in terms of things are not like in exactly the right place or moving in exactly the right way. The vibrations come through and just kind of shakes it all up a little bit, and it's kind of like settles.
So like if you had something that's wrinkled, like a shirt.
Yes, there you go.
Shake
Thank
it
you.
out.
Your example is way easier to understand than mine. I like that. Shake out your shirt,
Shake
and
out the
then you
shirt.
hold it straight, right? So once again, with ultrasound, as with many other things, it tends to be helpful to not just do the ultrasound treatment and then go about your life, but do a little bit more along with it. And I will mention this. One of the things that is notable about ultrasound is it's also a really effective way to expose fractures or near fractures in the bones. Because remember, we're talking about vibrations here. If you take an ultrasound tool and put it up against a stress fracture, especially if it's close to the surface, those vibrations will be excruciating. Because now you're talking about you're shaking the fracture. Not a fun thing, right? So that's actually
there are a lot of different methods and applications for ultrasound that I discovered as I was studying for this. And if you're interested in learning more, I can link to it. The National Library of Medicine published an overview. So you can find that there. We can't go through them all. But what we usually are looking for when it comes to ultrasound for runners is repairing of tissue, reducing healing times, and helping with greater mobility. And there's research, again, there's different methods, and I don't know exactly which one was used for which, but there was a study on bone injury, and during fresh fracture repair, ultrasound reduced healing times by 30 to 38%, which is significant. And when applied to non-united fractures, ones that aren't touching, like there's a gap there, it stimulated union in 86% of cases.
So I would love to read more on this
Yeah.
and find people doing more work on this, because that's fascinating, and those are substantial results.
Yes.
So if that's consistently true, I mean, we're talking about like everyone should be doing that every time.
But
they
I've
have a
never
fracture.
heard of that until
However,
I studied this.
I also want to ask the question: how did that feel for those patients? Because
Right, it would
remember what I
hurt.
just said: fractures, when vibrated by ultrasound, hurt immensely. I know this from personal experience. I've had a stress fracture that my PT said, that Adam said, let's just double check this, because we didn't have an x-ray that showed it, but we were all, the doctor, the PT, we were all very confident this was a stress fracture. He takes that ultrasound wand to it, and he's like, all right, I'm just going to slowly turn this up. Tell me when it starts to hurt. And he's turning it up, and suddenly I start to feel like what amounted to a kind of burning sensation, which was really weird at the moment. And then he turns it up more, and it goes from burning to like my legs on fire. And that was just a few seconds. Imagine trying to be treated this. I don't know. I want to know. I want to know now. I'm very curious. But that's insightful. So bone-related injuries could have some substantial results.
But beyond that, there is like nothing.
Very little.
An Oxford review of therapeutic ultrasound and its effectiveness, they say this, I'll just quote them. There is still little evidence of clinical effectiveness of therapeutic ultrasound as currently used by physical therapists to treat people with pain and musculoskeletal injuries and to promote soft tissue healing. There's just not enough research. And what I had looked into as some of the caveats to their study was that there is a discrepancy in how it's being used and the intensities. Yep. So there's not a lot of consistency. And again, I think that it's better used in conjunction with other therapies. So like at the physical therapy office, you're also doing other work with them. So I think that that's kind of the story here.
And think too about, in essence, what's happening here. We're talking about vibrations now. And vibrations are the most effective and the most dense materials, which is why that bone, the bone study is the most compelling here, because vibrations definitely are going to have greater effect on bones than on muscles.
Yeah, still fascinating to me.
And then the other side of it is where many believe to be a more practical application is things like trying to address scar tissue. So because scar tissue is a denser. Again, tissue, vibrations in the scar tissue may be able to help break it up a bit more, especially if you use it in conjunction with something else. Do a little bit of ultrasound and then do some scraping from some Graston. You might be able to break up the scar tissue more easily then. So again, none of that is proven, but those are ways that you see physical therapists trying to use it, with the assumption that rationally this should help, but it's not well proven.
Yeah. And as the other ones were also the case, there's very little risk. If you are feeling burning, tell your physical therapist or whomever is doing this strategy on you. So that's the one risk factor, is you could get burned by it.
Excessive ultrasound in a single location at high intensities can cause tissue damage. So
But if you're not feeling that, it's likely not going to be hurting you. So
you'll know.
I feel like the risk is pretty low.
As I mentioned, I've had ultrasound and it's been unpleasant at times, and that it was obvious when it was too much, when it became too much.
Last one is eStim.
eStim, which I believe stands for electrical stimulation.
Yes, you're right, Zach.
All right, good.
You're right.
I always
Electrical
just called it
stimulation
eStim,
therapy is applied to the body in the form of electrodes, which stimulate local muscular contraction.
All right, so check it out. We're zapping you with lasers. We're stabbing you with needles. We're sound waving, ultrasonically vibrating you, and now we're electrocuting you, literally. And they call these things therapies. What next? They're going to talk about soaking you in hot wax or something.
Oh dear. All right, so what does this do for runners? By contracting the muscles, there's stimulation of blood flow. The dominant advantage, however, and the findings reveal this, is the stimulation of motor neurons.
It's activation phase benefit then, therapy.
So the research was interesting. Again, it was varied because there's different applications for using this. There was implications for motor relearning and strengthening, And that was very measurable in one study. And that was with patients who had experienced motor loss. So like strokes, or they had some sort of severe injury where they were like relearning how to do something, like relearning to walk, or they had a surgery that was requiring them to focus on some of that neuromuscular activation to be able to function properly.
What about a scenario where you have a runner who is not firing in the proper kinetic order, which is not the right the kinetic chain is not firing in the proper order? Would something like this help potentially with?
I think so.
I don't know
That's
how
what
you
I
would
was
do
thinking
that.
Well, no, because I had a friend who wore it on her body when she was running because she wasn't activating some of her muscles,
Right.
and that helped her activate.
Yeah, you can't really help but activate when you're getting zapped.
Yeah, so it was like a
Constantly.
retraining. It
Interesting.
had a similar idea to that study. There was also a study on athletes to see if there was measurable muscle growth or not. And this
Oh,
was
yes.
interesting. It was
I've seen this.
it was called 6-pad abs fit device. And so it was electrodes on the abs, and it was a treatment that was done. So they had like a control group and then those that had these ab stimulators.
So pause here for a second. Now, everyone listening, make predictions. Okay, so make predictions, because the idea here is by forcing muscle contractions, we could potentially passively strengthen a muscle. Okay, that's the goal with these ab pads. Is that what they were called? Ab pads?
They're called 6-pad abs fit device.
6-pad abs fit. They got the words messed up.
Well, it's because it was a brand. So
Okay. Well, anyway, so make a prediction. All right, now go ahead, Andy.
All right.
No,
The
don't do
answer
that.
is no. There was no improvement.
Did not help.
It didn't help
All those
for
silly
muscle
people
growth.
shocking themselves to
However,
try to get a 6-pack.
When used with exercise,
Of course.
it did work out.
So what was the benefit? The exercise or the electricity?
I think it was the activation that helped them then train better. That's kind of
interesting.
what the implications are. It was a 12-week study with athletes. There were actually elite rugby players.
Ooh.
And there was a group using e-stim, and there was a group that was not. And those that were using it had more strength and power when they were measuring those.
Improvements in strength and power.
Yep.
Okay, so it's okay. Well, here, coaches everywhere listening, you need to electrocute your athletes to have
He's
better.
kidding. He's kidding.
To have better gains. In fact, that's what you watch March Madness NCAA basketball. That's what those coaches are doing behind the scenes. They've got all their basketball players attached to electrodes, and then when they're like practicing free throws, they're electrocuting them while they're shooting.
Okay, he thinks he's being funny, guys. No, we're advising only to do things that are safe to move towards improvement, and all of these things are best done with a practitioner or somebody who has studied and knows how to do it properly. It also is just way more effective because they know the places to put these needles and to do these things. So make sure.
Don't go around stabbing yourself with a kitchen knife or something.
Don't do that. Okay.
That's not going to be effective.
Okay. So those are just some of the interesting treatments that you might be able to do to help you on the path toward recovery and healing if you've had an injury or you need a little bit of rewiring.
So the moral of the story, when we're talking about the recovery series here, is there's a lot out there. There's a lot you can do. And not all recovery approaches or therapies or treatments are equal, both in value or in accessibility. And at the same time, certain things make a bigger difference on certain concerns, certain issues. And so this is where, when it all comes back to, is we need to have, as runners, as athletes, we need to have in our toolkit a number of options. And we need to understand how those options can be best applied so that when I've got an issue on my run today, I know something I can do today that should be able to help me. But I also need to have a savvy toward what kind of an issue is something that I need to go seek someone else's help with, and do so sooner rather than later, because as we find with any of these kinds of recovery treatments, many of them can be helpful and effective in speeding along the recovery process, but they are the most effective the earlier on they happen in the process. So everyone out there who's listening right now, and you have been hobbling along on that hamstring injury, Dan, or I mean somebody who might have a hamstring pain. So if you've got that thing and it's been going on for a while, you're waiting too long to try to do something about it. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone who's got an issue right now hasn't been doing something about it. But the point is, if you've been ignoring the problem, hoping that it'll get better eventually, it's harder to get it to get better the longer you ignore it.
Right. And other things pop up. And I know this from personal experience. So what starts in your hips then goes to your calf and your hamstring. And so obviously we're full humans, and everything is connected.
Let's do this, Andy. Let's do this. 2 examples. Give me yours. Your calf recently.
Yeah.
What happened? What did it feel like, and what did you do about it?
Okay. So I was increasing my mileage. Do you know how it happened?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So I was increasing my mileage, but I was also working very long days in work-issued heels. So they were a required heel.
Wardrobe.
Wardrobe.
If you work in wardrobe at a company, don't put your people in heels.
They're not supposed to say stuff. Okay. So yeah, those heels, it was a difficult thing because I ran a 20-miler in heels and then went to work all day where my calf was contracted. I did this for over a week where I was doing more mileage than I did the normal growth in it, but I was doing that in conjunction with wearing these heels. And so
but your calves did look really nice.
Yeah, well, maybe. I don't know. And so I went to do a fartlek after a weekend where I had worked in the heels and did a 20-miler, and it was all constricted like that. And I pushed off in an explosive motion. Granted, I had done a warm-up. I had done all the things.
You were well warmed. You did all, yep.
And I strained my calf.
Strained it. So what'd you do about that? Try to run again the next day? Or did you call your coach and say, hey, coach, here's what happened. What should I do?
That's what I did. So I took time off. I actually ended up taking more time than maybe I needed, but I took over a week off.
Yep.
And that was my reset. And then I started back in.
But what did you do during that week off? Just pretend like you weren't a runner anymore, or did you?
No, I had to do all the things, all of them.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of calf stretching, and I did massage, and I realized my hamstrings were tight. I did scraping. I did some baths and
some Epsom salt baths.
I did. And I did some yoga. So lots of things that I did.
Okay. And so here's the summary of Andy's situation. She felt the calf thing and she thought, you know what? This is not a good thing. Especially when you feel that like sudden, like the pull, that's bad. That's usually something you shouldn't try to run through. You certainly shouldn't try to run on it again the next day and hope that it's somehow going to feel better on the run than it did when you woke up in the morning. But the point is, the immediate solution there is I got to start doing the stuff that helps with recovery. And Andy just mentioned it. So right away, she's like, okay, the calf by itself is not necessarily the single problem here. And this is almost always the case with runners. So she starts looking at, okay, my hamstrings happen to also be really tight. So I should do, if I'm doing my Graston, my scraping myofascial release, I should do that on any of those tight areas because they all interact with each other. And also, when I'm taking that time off and I'm resting, what are the things I'm doing to ensure that the healing and recovery is happening as well as I can facilitate it, and that when I start running again, I'm not in the same situation I was before. So what am I doing to put myself in a better situation when I start running again? In that case, doing the stretches and mobilizing and things of that nature, and trying to get out of the heels for a little bit. Rest those
I did. I was able
calves.
to, so that was good.
Yeah, so that's a good example. That's a good case study in how to address then recovery scenarios and situations.
I did go to my PT too. I should also mention that I went there the day after. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, he had an opening for me, so I was able to get in and have some help there. So, yeah, there's just things will pop up, and in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, 20-miler and then standing in heels, it's a bad idea. But there's the navigating that you have to do when it comes to life and sport.
Yep. So here's mine, and mine's going to be a 10-second example. But I had some hip discomfort. It was kind of like tightness at first, and then day by day for about a week, it was kind of worsening toward more like pain. And got to the point where it was like, clearly, as I'm running right now, I'm worsening it because it's getting worse each day. Not so bad. It really just wasn't all that bad, but it was obvious that it was getting worse as I was progressing. So I immediately took a day off, and then knowing the nature of this pain, because it's not something new to me, and having a pretty good idea of what's going on with my hip in that situation, I spent quite a bit of time that day trying to address the issue with the joint that was going on. And then the next day, a very, very easy jog, and it was shorter than normal, just to kind of essentially to see if that was helping relieve it at all. And in fact, it helped immensely. So then I was like, okay, now I know I'm making progress here, and I know what is helping me to make that progress. So I immediately am going to focus on those types of things while easing back up the training to see if I can sustain training still and be able to get on top of it with the other stuff. And in fact, I was able to. However, I noticed after a few days that I started kind of forgetting about my extra work because it was feeling pretty good, and it started to come back again, right? So I had to stay on top of those things more deliberately. And in that situation, unlike Andy's, it wasn't really a single strain moment, and it wasn't something that was clearly I couldn't do the running thing. And so I was able to address that issue in a very different way. Okay, well, those are the things. We talk about recovery because when it comes down to it, you're going to have something hurting at some point or another if you are a runner. What are the two stats, Andy? It's like 50% of runners
are injured right
now. And
yep.
Or 25% of runners are injured.
No, it's 50% of runners are injured right now.
And 25% of us are going to have some kind of substantial disruption in this year, within the year. Okay, So that's not good.
But go back and listen to the myofascial release, because those can help you prevent big issues from happening. A lot of it stems from not having really great muscle movement and having bound myofascia or tight muscles and not strengthening them in the proper way. So having those things be on your radar now
preventative
can help
is better than response or reactive.
Absolutely.
And the preventative stuff tends to be pretty easy to do. So do it. Make no excuses. Do it.
Well, let's get on now to the world of running.
Hey, we got some shout outs to A to Z runners. Laura, nice work on the half marathon despite some difficulties with the legs. Still having
she ran so smart
just
and
being
strong.
wise.
It was still great. It was a great race.
Yeah, so glad for the smart choices in those kinds of situations. Craig, yet another wonderful marathon, and this one even especially positive for the nature of how it felt when he was doing
fantastic.
it. So it's kind of like a testing. This one was a testing experience. So nice
Good
work,
job,
Craig. That was really good stuff.
More good stuff happening in NYC. There was the half marathon there, and it had a stacked field. Very exciting. And in fact, I believe that the winners were first-time participants.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe.
Well, Jacob Kiplimo was, but I don't know about the.
I believe both of them were.
Okay.
Well, you gave away. Jacob
Whoops.
Kiplimo was the victor in this race. He put the hammer down, running faster with each 5K. And here are the splits.
This is brutal.
15:14, 14:58, 14:24, 13:52.
Why do other people even try when he's in the race?
Oh, my word.
Why do they even try?
Jacob Kiplimo.
Why don't they just go home as soon as they see him on the start line?
Because runner-up was Joshua Cheptegei, and he does not do
Countryman
that.
Cheptegei. No, he doesn't.
He
As a
does
matter of
not
fact,
back down.
He has beat Kiplimo a fair number of times.
Exactly.
Although,
So-
granted, they're all on the track. Pretty much none on the roads. But
And someone else was hanging with them.
Who's
Previous
that?
podcast guest, Zuhair
Zuhair.
Talbi. He was third. So that was an exciting trio to be following in this race. Again, I'll mention second place was Joshua Cheptegei, and he was in second with a time of 1:02:09. And this is only his second half marathon.
yeah, he doesn't do the roads much,
Yeah.
or at least he hasn't.
And he was very
He'll
pleased with
continue
his
to
finish, and he had to battle it out with Zuhair Talbi for that second place position. Talbi in third with a time of 1:02:18.
Yeah.
And the top American in the race was Ben True in
Once
fourth
again.
place with a time of 1:02:57. He is so consistent. He won this race actually back in 2018. And as we mentioned, it was first time appearance for Jacob Kiplimo. And then on the women's side, should we tell them who won to start it off?
I mean, you're kind of supposed to. That's the point of
All
what we're
right.
doing
Helen
here.
O'Beary won with a new course record,
course
even
she
though
ran a
it
new
was
course record.
terrible conditions.
Well, I
Horrible
mean,
conditions.
But she is Helen O'Beary.
She is Helen O'Beary. But she hates winter, which is funny because Dathan Ritzenhein actually mentioned in a post-race interview how much she hates winter, and he was afraid because she hates it so much.
Listen,
But she's in really good shape. He also
I don't
said.
begrudge anyone who's from the Rift Valley who has to run in winter because, it's just not fun. And it's not common around those parts of the world either. So, no, not cool.
Yep, below freezing temperatures, and the headwind. Oof. O'Beary's time was 1:07:21, again, to claim that course record. And that was over last year's winner, Senberi Teferi. And she was able to hold on to O'Beary for a while. She was the only one, actually. It was just pretty much the two of them. But she was the previous course record holder, I believe. I didn't write that in here, but I think I remember reading that. And this is a fun fact. O'Beary is the only woman in history to win world titles in indoor track, outdoor track, and cross country.
Yeah.
And now will she be a marathon winner someday? I don't know.
She will. Yeah.
She's getting started with this road racing, and it's really exciting to see. Teferi, who was the previous course record holder, I did write it, matched her time that she had run last year in a time of 1:07:35.
Well, I mean, you can't. So you're running the fastest time that anyone's ever run on the course, minus the person who beats you in the race. Yeah, you're doing about as much as you can.
Yeah. Prize purse was $20,000 in this event. Des Linden was the first American with a fifth place finish in a time of 1:12:21.
All right. She still runs races?
I thought it was really notable because she had done some other things for a while. She did that ultra a couple years ago where she got the American record, and she's been getting back into training, but hasn't really had as many significant efforts, and she just gave herself some time. But obviously she's back. I mean, fifth place finish in this field is phenomenal. Previous guests Dakota Lindworm and Erica Kemp were 6th and 10th places as well, so wanted to mention and give them a shout out too.
Cool stuff. Well, speaking of terrible race experiences, so New York City was bad weather, but the Barkley marathons
terrible
are just
in an epic way.
Always bad. I shouldn't say are. It's one event. So the Barkley marathons is always bad. So here's the deal. Barkley marathons. If you're not familiar with this event, we're going to tell you about it here for a moment. You should be, because it's just about the craziest one out there because of its weirdness.
Okay, tell us more.
Okay, so here's the background. Barkley Marathons was founded in 1986 by, what's his name? Cantrell. Gary, I think. So Gary Cantrell founds this event in 1986. Apparently the reason he founded the event, which is just by itself a whole story, has something to do with the fact that the guy who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. was held in a prison in Tennessee and escaped into the mountains in that area.
Really?
And yes, and apparently made it about 8 miles into the mountains before he was recaptured. Okay? He was caught. So I guess Cantrell is reading about this or hears about this and thinks to himself, I bet I could make it 100 miles in those mountains. Right? So then he starts a race event to prove whether he can make it 100 miles in the mountains. I don't know if he's ever done it. He's the one who directs the event. I don't think he actually has. But either way, here's the deal.
Why is it called marathons then?
Yes. Okay. So in 1986, it's supposed to be 100 miles, 5 loops. And he says they're 20-mile loops. Everyone who runs it says no. They are definitely longer than 20 miles. It's just kind of like a random, it's 20-ish miles. No, it's like a marathon or longer. And so what you have to do, and this is where it all begins, right? This is the craziness of Gary Cantrell. Is it Gary?
Yeah,
I wrote his name somewhere in here.
It says Gary.
So Cantrell does not have a race event post anywhere that you can register or learn about it. There's nowhere to find information on this, right? Except for from us here now, or where we found it, which is Runner's World or Outside Magazine. So you can find out about it all over the internet. But the point is there's no race website. There's no official way to find out about this event or register for it.
They want no liability.
Here's what you do. Yeah, right? Here's what you do. You have to send a letter in the mail to Gary. And in that letter, you have to basically apply for, I want to run the event. Okay? And he's got to decide whether or not he's going to let you in as well. So it's kind of like you're putting like a resume into this letter, and you got to, it's like $1.60, whatever, to mail this thing. So there's no fee. Okay. You don't pay a fee. You just apply, and he'll let you know if you get in. But then in his acceptance letter, he's going to ask for something. And if you want to get in the race, you got to give him what he asks for.
What?
And it's like a pair of socks or a button-down shirt or like random
like
stuff.
Things he actually
clothing.
needs.
I'm guessing that he literally gets all of his clothing for the year from people entering this race.
Oh my word!
So
that's hilarious.
I know, this is so funny. All right, so that's how you apply. But then, by the way, if you're a first timer, if you've never done the event before, and he's got a name for first timers, but if you're a first timer, then he also asks you to send a license plate from your home state or country.
Cool.
So he's got
he probably has a really
somewhere
cool
he has a wall of
I bet
license
he has a really
plates.
cool basement.
Oh, these wouldn't fit in just a basement. Over 1,000 people have done this event.
Oh my word.
I don't know. I don't know where he keeps all of these, but he's got to have them posted somewhere. So anyway,
cool.
so this is how you apply. All right. Now you got in because you got the invitation and you gave him whatever article of clothing he asked for. But here's the worst part. At that point, he'll let you know when the race will be because there's no set date for this event. Part of it is he doesn't want spectators, all right? So he's intentionally keeping it secret. And then he tells you, like, you can only bring, like, 2 people with you, and they can't be on the race course.
For your crew?
Yeah, right. They can't be on the race course, but it's a loop race.
Spots.
Remember, it's a loop race, so they just all have this base camp. All right, so just a couple of people with you, no spectators. And then when you get there for the race, you know where the location is because he'll tell you where it is. It's like this gate in the middle of this state park. Like there's just a yellow gate. You know, like those yellow gates across roads that are metal. It's that. That's the race location. I don't know exactly where it is beyond that. And then you get there, and he will say, we will start sometime between midnight and noon on this day. Sometime. All right? And here's how you know when. He's going to blow a conch shell, and that means you have 1 hour before the start. And he'll do it whenever he feels like it.
Oh my word. Sounds so like secretive.
All right, now get this. That's not even the end of it. So 1 hour after he blows the conch shell, everyone's getting ready to start the race, okay? And how do you know when you actually go? He'll light a cigarette. And that's when it's time to start. This guy is so funny.
That's so random.
All right, so urban legends abound. Who knows how much of this is really true?
I'm thinking that maybe Chad, Aaron,
you're talking
Lewis,
to
RJ,
some people who need to do this.
I bet they're wanting this to
But
do
we're
this
not
race.
done. We're not done, Andy. So here's how this works. You have 60 hours to complete 5 loops of the course, okay? 5 loops.
Okay.
And the loops are going to be basically a marathon. So that means you got, and there's a cutoff time, 12 hours for each one. So that's not too bad, right? 12 hours for a marathon. Our ultra people who are talking about, okay, 26 miles in 12 hours. Yeah, definitely doable. But this is a mountain. We're talking about 18,000 feet of elevation or something with every loop. I don't know exactly what it is. But over the course, no, it's 12,000 because it's 60,000 feet. Anyway, you're talking about serious elevation. You're in a mountain. There are no trails. You're not doing this on trails. You're just basically bushwhacking the mountain. So you're not talking about like running more than like foliage hiking. Okay, so there's that. But here's the challenge. At the start of each loop, he will hold out a map, one copy of a map. You have to, as quickly as possible, copy that map down, like on a piece of paper or something. There are no phones allowed, no GPS is allowed.
Oh, no.
That map is going to show you where to go in these random woods in this mountain, and somewhere on the course is a book, and you have to find it and rip out the page that corresponds with your bib number. And if you don't come back with that page, it doesn't matter that you did the whole thing. You are out.
Really?
So you have to rip the page out of the book, right? And wherever
that
these
would
books
be my
are
undoing.
on this loop. Okay, so you rip out the pages. I don't know how many there are, but you got to find the books based off this map, which you're probably scrolling on pieces of paper or the back of your hand or something. And then you do the loop. You get done. You bring back your pages. If you get done within 12 hours, you're good. You can just hang out. And at the end of those 12 hours, you start again with a new map with new books to find. Yeah. And you got to rip out those pages, and they give you a new bib. All right. So you got to find, more pages with a new bib because it's a new page number. Okay. So this is how this works. Every time you come back with your pages, that's how they know that you completed the loop because, that's your proof. Otherwise, how would anyone know where you were that whole time? You could have just gone and taken a nap under a rock. Well, so you got your pages. That's proof that you completed the loop. You get done within 12 hours. You can rest until that 12 hours is up, and then you have to start again. And if you miss the cutoff, you're out. So now here's how crazy this is. About 1,000 people have done the event. Anyone want to take a guess? Some of you might even know how many people total, including this year, have actually completed all 5 loops. Over 1,000 people. 21 total have ever completed this. No woman has ever made it to loop 5. Only 21 men have ever completed the event, period. So now we're talking about you've got, at best, a 2% chance of finishing the event if you start this thing. And if you're a woman, it's practically speaking a 0% chance because no one ever has. In this year, however, 3 men finished it in 1 year, which that's like happened one other time, I think. That's crazy. So, and these 3 guys, these are serious dudes. So Aurelien Sanchez, who I believe is French, won the event in a pretty impressive time, 58 hours and change or 57 hours and change. And then John Kelly was second, and this is his second time completing it, which is, I mean, to have a repeat completion, that's good stuff. By the way, John Kelly is the last person who completed it back in 2017.
Wow, it's been a while.
So we're talking about 6 years. Well, they had to skip a year from COVID. So 4 events that no one had completed it.
Wow.
So that matters. And then Carl Sabe as well. I believe he's Belgian, completed it. And Damian Hall started the 5th loop. So there are actually 4 guys still going in the 5th loop, which is by itself super impressive. But Damian Hall did not finish. He never found the book.
Yeah, so close.
Yeah, so almost got there. Jasmine Paris, for the women, was only the 2nd woman ever to start the 4th loop. So that by itself, that is a feat. She made it to be the beginning of the 4th loop, set a new women's record as well in the process, and just, inching closer. It wasn't that far off, inching closer to that 5th loop. And I should mention, they're serious about the cutoff. So like they said, people have missed it by like 2 or 3 seconds, and that's it. If you don't touch the yellow gate by the time that Gary Cantrell has on his watch, he will not let you start the next one. Like 2 seconds even. No good. So
wow.
Brutal. Yeah,
that
brutal.
is brutal.
All right, well, there you have it. 21 have ever completed it, so you got a 2% chance, and that's now we're talking about since 1986. This is just...
That's the weirdest event.
Weirdest
I've ever heard
event on the planet.
Yeah.
Oh, I should mention, he started the event in 1986. The first time anyone actually ever completed it was 1995. It took 9 years before someone even finished it.
Wow. The fact that he kept
Why did they even keep
event.
doing it? It was like, no, this is terrible, man.
Because it's unique and quirky.
Oh.
People like unique and quirky.
I don't know. It certainly is that. Well, for our last note for the World of Running segment here, we wanted to talk about an interesting article. This one also from
Do we really
want to
share this one?
I do, because it's fascinating and it is encouraging and inspiring. So,
all right.
Runners, y'all runners listening to us right now, there's one thing among certainly several possible things, but there's one thing for sure that is true for every single one of us. We are all getting older.
Shoot.
Every day.
Just kidding.
Every single day.
I look forward to many things about getting older, but some, I don't as much.
Well, one thing that runners tend to not look forward to is the actual performance loss that happens in aging. Well, there have been many studies around this, and not to get too far into it, if you want to read the Outside Magazine article, they actually cite a couple of these studies that are really in-depth, and it's worth reading because it's just interesting to know the numbers. But here's how it goes. Basically, for almost everyone, and of course there's tons of variation by individual, but the average is at about the age of 25, our performance capacity begins to decline to the tune of about 10% VO2 max loss every 10 years. 10% every 10 years. So the easy numbers to remember. 10% every decade.
25?
Yeah, after the age of 25. Now, this is not true of every single person, and I'm going to talk about why in a moment, but there are certain things behaviorally that change it, and there are many things genetically that change it. So I'm not going to go too far into the weeds here. Just understand that the average in a general human population is 10% every 10 years. Now, that's human population. Apply runners to the mix, and that's closer to like 5% for like active runners who are training consistently. You might see 5 or a little more percent decline every 10 years. So that's encouraging, right? It means the activity that you're doing is helping offset the age loss variable, which is good. But there's a lot more involved here. And one thing I want to plug here is that because many of the studies only look at certain metrics to try to keep it consistent, something else that makes a difference here is we know that VO2 max, as is influenced by aerobic capacity, is the most common measurement they use to show this, but they're not measuring for factors like musculoskeletal strength or neuromuscular efficiency. And so we already know that spending time doing those types of things is as well going to reduce the age loss decline of performance. So it could be even less than, like, in terms of like total performance loss, it could be less than 5% for every decade. So that's encouraging. Like, we're talking about, you can really minimize that loss by the nature of the things you're doing. However, here's what I wanted to get into is they started to look at, okay, what changes depending on people's behaviors, and we're talking about training and such, and how does that play in terms of to the numbers? One example, and I don't remember exactly, you have to read the article, I didn't write it down. Whoever did this study produced essentially kind of a really practical approach, which essentially said they have found that increasing an hour of training per year, or per week rather, per year, so an hour of training more each week, each year, is going to offset that essentially 1-ish% loss in VO2 max. So the idea here is, if you're 25 years old and you just start running, right? Every year, add an hour of training to your total weekly volume, and you're essentially going to have a net zero performance loss until you get to the point where you can't continue to increase.
Right, I was about to say, that's
there's
like
a practical
lot
limit.
Of time.
Yeah, there's a practical
In a
limit.
decade.
Think about it. In 10 years' time, you're adding an hour to each week. You're talking about adding 10 hours to the week. By the end of
you can't do
that's
that.
a lot, right? Now, if
You shouldn't do more than 10 hours.
Well, yeah, but if you're starting from zero, this is the point, right? If you're starting from zero, so you can offset a decade's decline by 10 hours worth of increase in training, which is too much for most people, but it helps some. So you're increasing some if your capacity is able to handle an increase. That's interesting. Now, that, of course, is not practical for most of us. That was my point there. That was an example of one thing that showed a way to combat the loss, kind of net zero, but that's not practical for most of us. I should say that came from, that was inspired by, the legend of Milo of Croton, who was like the ancient Olympian, the Greek. I think, no, he's not Greek. He's from Croton. But anyway, the ancient Olympian who claimed, he was a wrestler, claimed that if you lift a baby cow over your head every day, as it grows bigger, eventually you'll be lifting a cow over your head, right? Like a full-grown cow, theoretically.
Yeah,
and of course, there's a practical limit. You get to a point where the cow is too heavy for a human to lift, right? That's the idea here. So you get to a point where you're running too much, and that's not helpful anymore. So yes, we know there's a practical limit. However, here's the key, and this is where the study really got into the weeds that was so interesting, which is the things that make the biggest difference all boil down to one above anything else, and that is the consistent application of high volumes of low-intensity cardiovascular work. And it's not just running, it's just cardiovascular stimulus, high volumes of low-intensity cardiovascular stimulus implemented consistently over time are the things that are minimizing the age loss factor.
I like the sound of that. I love long, slow runs.
Slow. It's good. It's telling. Now, here's what we have to apply to that. From our perspective, it's always going to be back to there's more than one thing you can do to help yourself. So do all of the things, and you're going to help yourself even more. That means like things like strength and mobility work to increase movement efficiency, neuromuscular types of training capacities to increase running economy. All of that stuff further diminishes the loss that we're discussing here, to the point where now this is where they start to talk about, they see so many examples of runners who maybe end up having to take some time off for a while for like a major injury or just in life in general, and they come back 5, 6, 7 years later, and theoretically they shouldn't be able to be as fit, right? Because that's a lot of time off, but also you're 6 or 7 years older, and yet they come back and they're better than ever. Performance value.
Are you talking about Kira Yamato?
I'm talking about a lot of people. In fact, they started citing examples, and there were tons of them. So the point here is there's a lot we can do, and this concern we have of the age loss factor is a legitimate concern in the sense that it does happen and it is always happening. But it is not as substantial as often feared if we're doing certain kinds of things that offset it most effectively. There you go.
That was encouraging. You're right.
Yeah, see? I like it.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of encouragement, you don't have to listen to us anymore because we're wrapping it up.
Until next week.
Until next week, when you can be discouraged thoroughly by the sound of our
No.
voice in your ears once
Zach.
again.
Okay. But we do love having conversations with you. And again, plugging it for that question, the Q&A, which is our favorite episode. Please send us your questions. We love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. Tell a friend.
Yeah, all of that. But don't miss us on March 22 at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We are live on Facebook.
I don't know if I'll be there for that, but
Well, I will.
yeah, I might be checking in with you virtually as well. So
Okay.
very good. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.